My broader perspective on this is that we are living in this time that's very divided and polarizing. Our job is to go everywhere and to talk to everyone. We've noticed that there are some parts of the state where people feel a little bit marginalized, a little bit left out of what's going on in the state, for whatever reason that is. So we really feel that it's our mission to provide that space, to be there, to welcome people in, to not only say, yeah, we're including you, but to actually be doing it, to make it to every single county, reach out to small communities. If somebody asks us, we always show up. That's really a high priority for us.
Bienvenidos. This is Encounter Culture from the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. I'm your host and editor of El Palacio magazine, Emily Withnall.
Wonders on Wheels. We're called WOW, which is a very fitting nickname for us. We are a 38-foot RV, specially fitted for a museum exhibition. And we take that exhibition to schools and libraries and special events all over the state of New Mexico. We travel to all 33 counties every single year. We make between 115 and 120 visits every year, and we serve between 11,000 and 12,000 New Mexicans every year.
This is Jennifer Hasty, a cultural anthropologist by training who worked for many, many years studying media and politics in West Africa before transitioning into the museum world. Jennifer and I work in the same building on Museum Hill in Santa Fe, and she is currently the program manager for Wonders on Wheels Mobile Museum, or as we call it around here, WOW.
We really focus on being an all-ages museum experience for families, for friend groups, for everyone in all regions, all ethnic identities, all rural and urban people, people in tribal communities. We're really trying to reach out to all New Mexicans to include all New Mexicans in discussions about New Mexico culture and history and the arts.
You said you go to all 33 counties. How many cities and towns and pueblos do you go to?
So I would say, no, I'm just estimating, but of 120, I would say that we probably go to at least 100. We don't make very many repeat visits. We do go to Albuquerque maybe a couple of times a year, Las Cruces 2 or 3 times a year. But for the most part, we're really looking to expand our reach as far as possible, and in particular to add new communities. We go to new communities all the time, communities where people have never even heard of us, where they didn't even know there was a mobile museum program. So we really prioritize going to new places that don't really get much cultural programming otherwise.
Yeah, I was actually surprised to hear you say that you go to Albuquerque a couple of times, because obviously they have many wonderful museums, as does Santa Fe. So what are some of the reasons or advantages to bringing a mobile museum to a place that already has museums?
Most of the time when we get a request from Albuquerque, it has to be something special. So we go to schools of special needs kids. We go to schools on the southern end of Albuquerque that have a lot of tribal students going to that school. We go to very large events. If they have a literacy event or a history fair, we might go to something like that. When we go to Santa Fe, when we go to Albuquerque, it's usually something really special.
Cool. I did not know that. So I want to ask you about what is in the RV now, but before we actually launch into that, I'd love to just hear a little bit about the particular challenges and opportunities of creating an exhibition space in such a small space compared to like what brick and mortar museums are able to do with much larger rooms.
Yeah, so our challenges are that and more so, because the RV is already fitted with cabinetry. So the cabinetry stays the same. So every time we design an exhibit, it has to fit in the furniture that we already have. So what we typically do, we partner with the different DCA organization every year, a specific museum or other cultural organization, and we start thinking about what specifically we have to do to make an exhibit fit in this space. Sometimes it's an exhibit that is already showing in a museum, but sometimes more often, actually, it's an original exhibit that we designed just for this space. Typically, we start out with a theme. The theme has to include everyone. So we try not to focus on specific communities or topics that might make other groups feel excluded. So a kind of all-inclusive theme that reaches out to all ages. So some complex content and some that's easier to translate to younger audiences, lots of thought-provoking questions, also cross-disciplines. So the arts, humanities, a little bit of science, all of those things kind of rolled into one topic, and it's got to be focused on New Mexico, arts, culture, and history. That's the baseline. Once we have that idea, we form a curatorial team and we go into the RV and we have Post-its. We start posting where different topics might go in the RV because we have glass cases that are full length, 3/4 length. We have certain tabletop areas where you can do manipulatives. It's got to fit in that space. So we spend a lot of time just on the RV, moving our Post-its around, figuring out where everything is going to go.
And this is you and your team, or it's also the team from whatever institution you're going to be featuring?
So when we're starting to organize a new exhibit, we form a curatorial team. And I'm a part of that team along with the curators and exhibit developers at that institution. We also include the Museum Resources Division, exhibit designers there, and the installers there work with us to actually build the museum exhibit.
Okay, so are all of those people in the RV putting Post-its on everything, or?
So it's typically the curatorial team consists of myself, a curator from the partner organization, someone from exhibits, and someone from fabrication. So it's usually 4. This year we have 5 because we've hired someone to help us with the text on the exhibit. So it's usually about a 5-person team. And we work independently, and then we come together periodically to do our Post-it routine.
So I'm actually curious then now to have you talk about your 2 staff members and what their backgrounds and training is, because I'm assuming they might not have the same background that you do.
Yeah, so we often have an outdoor activity that supplements the RV tour, and that is typically an arts-based activity or focusing on New Mexico history or some kind of participatory activity like that. So my 2 staff members, Allison Green and Heidi Heigerken, are both really excellent at developing those kinds of hands-on participatory activities. Allison Green is a working artist who taught for 20 years as an arts teacher, and Heidi Heigerken is a really wonderful educator focusing on younger children. She has a really wonderful interactive style, asking a lot of questions and really focusing on student-led learning.
Okay, let's dive into what is this year's theme been, and where have you been in the state so far?
Sure. So this year we partnered with New Mexico Historic Sites to design an exhibit about New Mexico history, really telling the story of New Mexico history by focusing on our 8 New Mexico historic sites. So we've organized the exhibit chronologically, starting with the Great Pueblo period, 1150 to 1300. 2 of our historic sites focus on this time period, moving forward into Hispano settlement, the 16th and 17th centuries in particular, moving on to the American territorial period from 1848 to 1911, and then circling around the RV to the early 20th century, the health-seeking period. So in each of those time periods, we show how here's some place you can go to experience what life was like during that time period. Our historic sites are these really wonderful places with lots of learning opportunities. You can experience these historic events and eras with all of your 5 senses. So we try to recreate some of that on the RV.
That sounds so challenging because that is a huge chunk of history to put in such a small space. And I know in the past you have done exhibitions that have focused on like one artist, for example. I mean, what were the unique challenges of putting this exhibition together?
The unique challenges were from the get-go that we had 8 historic sites and they each have their own story to tell. So we worked with the staff at each historic site to really rarefy that story down to 1 or 2 elements. We had text that started out being twice as large as it needed to be. And so we really had to cull it down to a small amount of text and really highlight very specific things, the most important elements of that story. So for instance, at Coronado Historic Site, a beautiful historic site commemorating the Quawa Pueblo and particularly highlighting the wonderful painted murals in one of the kivas from that historic site. So there are many, many things that one could say about that Pueblo, that whole way of life. As an anthropologist, of course, I'm really fascinated by the kinship system, the religious system, the ceremony, and so forth. We can't really talk about all of that, but it's my job to know all of that because what's in the exhibit is really meant to spark conversation. So to really narrow it down to something very simple, and then I'm there, walking people through, people have questions, and all of these other forms of knowledge come up in those conversations.
I'm really struck by the process as you're describing it because in some ways it parallels what I do with the magazine, like the art of curation and the art of editing. So I know we have a new historic site that's opening this weekend, I think, as we're recording it. It will already be open by the time this episode comes out. Is that also included in the RV?
Yes. In fact, as I mentioned before, the exhibit is organized chronologically. So we position Taylor Mesilla as the very last historic site featured in the exhibit. And the reason for that was because we wanted to think about Taylor Mesilla as an historic site that was settled by J. Paul Taylor and Mary Daniels Taylor in the 1950s. And then they rehabbed that building and filled it full of beautiful New Mexico art and then gave it away after their deaths. But also because we want people to leave with the message that there's a new New Mexico historic site that they should visit. So we were just down in the Las Cruces area. We did trunk or treat events in Las Cruces and also Deming, and we really spread the word.
For listeners who are interested, there's also going to be an article in the winter 2025 issue of El Palacio about Taylor Mesilla Historic Site. And in 2023, I believe, the summer issue, we also had a wonderful in-depth article about J. Paul Taylor that's still available online for people to read. So all of that is kind of converging around this new opening of this new historic site, which doesn't happen very often. So it's exciting. There's something truly special about visiting places where significant parts of our history have happened. The 8 state-run historic sites not only interpret history, but welcome visitors to engage in programs and events. In the northern part of the state, walk along the ancient Quahua Pueblo at Coronado, enjoy the breathtaking views of the mountains at Jemez, or sit by the Rio Grande after visiting the hacienda and Navajo churro sheep at Los Luceros. In southern New Mexico, learn about the long walk at Bosque Redondo Memorial, see where Buffalo soldiers were stationed at Fort Stanton, walk Billy the Kid's footsteps in Lincoln, learn adobe brickmaking at Fort Selden, and experience community art and history at Taylor Mesilla. Learn more and plan your visit at nmhistoric.sites.org. Did you know? Culture Pass gives you access to each of the 15 state museums and historic sites we feature on Encounter Culture. Reserve your Culture Pass today at nmculture.org/visit/culturepass. Some things you can find on the internet and others not so much. Putting together a publication as interesting and beautiful as El Palacio magazine is hard work, but it's well worth the effort. The articles we cover, ranging from artist profiles you can't find anywhere else, to impressive archaeological discoveries, to histories of events in New Mexico that are underrepresented in our state's archives, offer important and insightful writing about topics you definitely won't find on the internet. I may be just a little biased, but if you love New Mexico, you'll love El Palacio. Subscribe at elpalacio.org/subscribe. I guarantee you won't want to miss an issue. So I would love to know about some of the experiences that you've had on the road this year, and if there have been any memorable interactions you've had with visitors in the RV.
Yes. So central to my job is talking to people about how they link their own personal and family experiences to what they find in the RV. My broader perspective on this is that we are living in this time that's very divided and polarizing. Wonders on Wheels, our job is to go everywhere and to talk to everyone, no matter what their background, whether they're critical of the state, whether they're happy and supportive. We're there to reach out and include people in these conversations that we're trying to stimulate about New Mexico culture and history. We've noticed that there are some parts of the state where people feel a little bit marginalized, a little bit left out of what's going on in the state, for whatever reason that is. So sometimes people will comment, oh, we feel like the state doesn't really care about this region, or we don't really have as many cultural resources, and we don't really feel like we have the opportunity to join in on statewide conversations about New Mexico history and culture and contemporary issues. So we really feel that it's our mission to provide that space, to be there, to welcome people in, to not only say, yeah, we're including you, but to actually be doing it, to make it to every single county, reach out to small communities. If somebody asks us, we always show up. That's really a high priority for us. But I will also say that we often have very, very positive conversations with people who are on the RV who recognize the effort that has been put into reaching out to their specific community. So, for instance, this year, we have a focus on the Bosque Redondo Memorial at Fort Sumner. We've had many people of Dene and Nde background come on the RV and read what we've done there and say, this is good because it's honest. You're grappling with historical issues that are difficult to talk about, and yet you're just kind of laying it out and telling it like it is. Also, many, many positive conversations where what we've done in that display is to focus on resilience, the terrible things that happen to people in that place and time, but also how people held onto their culture and that kept them strong. And part of that culture was political, electing a series of leaders who negotiated their way out of that really terrible situation, but also their culture of weaving, their culture of spinning and weaving churro wool to make blankets to help them survive that really terrible period. So a woman came on just recently who was a Dene woman who sought me out and said, yeah, this is really wonderful. Thank you so much for including this story. And also, she wanted to show me videos of herself spinning and weaving and inviting us to her community to bring that exhibit to share with her community at a future weaving event. So that kind of thing happens. We also have a lot of people of Spanish heritage telling us that we know that my people came here in the 16th and 17th century. Somebody even said their family came with the Oñate expedition. So people are kind of connecting their own family histories that way. Many, many people have told us that people in their family had tuberculosis, and they came here during the health-seeking period hoping to recover from TB, and looking at our display and explaining what their own relatives went through in order to get through that illness. We've also had many funny stories focusing on the Lincoln Historic Site. People have told us that they know absolutely for certain that Billy the Kid was not shot by Sheriff Pat Garrett. That murder was faked, and Billy the Kid actually went into Texas, and they know the community, and they know exactly what happened to Billy the Kid after that. So we hear just so many stories. My take home from that is that people want to be included. Everybody wants to be included in the story of New Mexico. So if we can provide that, if we can draw people in to have those conversations, then I feel like we're doing our job.
That's wonderful. And I'm so interested and happy to hear about the Dene woman that you mentioned, for example, because I feel like that history often isn't talked about a lot. So I'm curious if you also have visitors to the van who are learning some of these histories for the first time.
Absolutely. So we have people of all ages, even seniors, who come on and they tell us, yeah, I know quite a bit about New Mexico history, but we have specifically designed this exhibit so that there's something in there that you're going to learn, something in there that you might not know about New Mexico history. So people will often say, oh, yeah, I thought I really knew my history, but I've learned something that I didn't know before. I'll say, for instance, we have on board the RV something called a pneumothorax machine. It's a very strange machine that was invented in the early 20th century to treat tuberculosis. It's a machine that deliberately collapsed your lung. If you had severe tuberculosis, they thought collapsing your lung by filling it with nitrogen gas, then all of the oxygen would breathe out of your lung and it would just collapse. That would give your lung a quote-unquote rest, and then hopefully it would grow back tuberculosis-free. It worked about 50% of the time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but people were really desperate. There were no drugs for it then. So people remark that, yeah, they knew about tuberculosis and that, the drugs were developed later and people had to go live in a kind of quarantine, spa-like environment, but they didn't really know about some of these specific treatment options.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild. And of course, the tuberculosis story is connected to Fort Stanton.
Yes.
That was a sanatorium at one point.
That's right.
Fort Stanton has been a lot of things, though. So for some of these historic sites that have contained many different histories, how did you decide what to focus on?
Yeah, so the way we decided that is we got all the historic site staff on one Zoom call and we started threshing it out. How can we organize this chronologically and which historic site can function in that way? So we had a gap in the early 20th century. That happened to be the time period that Fort Stanton was a tuberculosis hospital. So we decided we already had a lot of coverage in the American territorial period because so many American forts were built then. So we decided that Fort Stanton, we would focus on that time period, not the before and the after when there were so many other things going on at Fort Stanton.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But as I said before, it is our job to know all of that other stuff that, before it was functioning this way and this was what it was for, this is why it was built. And then also afterwards, that it became various other kinds of camps later on.
Yes, yeah, for sure. What have you learned about the state or specific communities on your journeys around the state?
Well, I've learned a lot. I've learned that people in rural and tribal communities are very, very eager to be a part of New Mexico culture officially. We have a lot of museums and cultural resources in Santa Fe and Albuquerque, and people really want to reach out and be a part of that. So when we give them that opportunity, they're very excited to share their stories. They really want us to come back. We have a lot of repeat visits when they invite us to. We come to one kind of event and as I mentioned before, we just visited Deming. We did a trunk or treat show where we served 2,400 New Mexicans in 2 hours.
Wow.
Very next morning, the woman from Deming Main Street called me up and invited me to a number of other events that they're having in the next coming months. So that really shows us that people are hungry for this kind of programming. We really, at Wonders on Wheels, we really wish we could double our numbers, get another vehicle, and really cover twice as many communities every single year. We used to really focus on schools. We made a lot of school visits before. In the past 3 years, we have stepped back and tried to make our programming more all ages, addressing family groups and friend groups that come on the RV. This is how it usually happens. People come on the RV with someone else, and we want them to engage in conversation with each other as well as with me or whoever happens to be on the RV. Because, cultural learning is conversational and people like to have stimulating questions as part of the text in order to kind of think about what they're seeing. So, yeah, I've learned about what a social experience it can be, and people will walk away, and I have the sense that this is a family memory that they're going to be able to relive and talk about later on. So that's a really gratifying feeling.
And of course, you get to be in the RV and drive through all the beautiful landscapes. Are there any favorite memories or stories of just being on the road?
All three of us have favorite parts of the state. Driving around in the mountains, even in the rain. It's really kind of like an IMAX experience because we have this enormous windshield and you're driving around on the highway and you're just surrounded by these beautiful vistas, mountains and rivers and plains. The diversity of New Mexico landscapes is just astonishing. It's just a real pleasure, this part of the job, like driving around, having a kind of secret thrill when you're going to a place that you really especially love. That's really a wonderful part of what we do.
I would love to get a sneak peek of your theme next year.
Next year, we are celebrating 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and all of the DCA organizations are doing something in honor of this. We stepped forward to do something which I think is very special. We're designing an exhibition called The Arts of Democracy in New Mexico. So really thinking about that time period of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, what was happening in New Mexico at that time period, going back and thinking about the development of democratic ideals, of the spirit of sovereignty and self-government here in New Mexico that happened separately from what was happening with the American colonies, but also was influenced by some of the same influences coming out of Europe, but then some of it that was happening entirely separately. So, for instance, looking at Pueblo culture and thinking about notions of self-governance and sovereignty that developed very independently in Pueblo cultures, forms of participatory government in Pueblo communities. So we trace that over time. We move forward then to think about the situation of Hispano settlers, Nuevo Mexicanos, here in the 17th and 18th centuries, also experiencing this sense of being on the hinterlands of empire in the same way that the American colonies were, of dealing with a situation of distant and often inattentive king, which the American colonies were complaining about in the Declaration of Independence, and then feeling like they had to fend for themselves, having trade limitations that were often difficult for them, and then having to invent their own forms of self-government. So what was going on the East Coast with the American colonies was separate from what was happening here, but many of those same passions, those same skills of self-government were developing here, and we want to trace that and foreground that and honor that.
What kind of team are you assembling or hoping to assemble?
So we have reached out to a number of different museums. The New Mexico Museum of History, also NM Arts, we're collaborating with them, and the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. So we're hoping to reach out to tribal governance, tribal elders, to get a sense of the best way to represent the development of self-government in those communities, and then also working with the museums, working with curators there, and then a couple of independent scholars who are helping us with the text. But we really have reached out far and wide to make connections with people who can also contribute their perspectives on this particular theme. And I would encourage any of your listeners, if they have a particular resource or a particular perspective that they really want to include in this exhibit, they can reach out to me personally, and I am happy to hear their perspectives.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So when does the current historic sites exhibition end? How much longer does that go? And then when does the next one start?
So usually we end our exhibit at Thanksgiving, but we got a later start this year. So we're going all the way to Christmas. And then we begin the process of deinstalling. We probably will deinstall for a couple of days, taking everything out, cleaning the RV. Then the RV has to go in for some maintenance. And then we start really the nuts and bolts of designing what goes where in the space itself. So the fabrication team will go on board and start taking measurements, and we hope to have a number of kind of new things built for this upcoming exhibit. So it'll take them a little while to build those things out, and then the installation happens in February. So we get on the road on March the 1st with the new exhibit.
Are there any patterns that you notice in the topics and themes that people are drawn to across exhibitions in the van, or particular regional interests based on where you go?
So this is a very interesting question. I'm glad you asked it, because we're living in a time where people want to sanitize history. Nobody wants to say anything controversial for fear of offending someone one way or the other on all sides. There's a lot of concern about that. What people want to talk about, though, are the controversial aspects of New Mexico culture and history. That is what is interesting to people. So part of what we do is to model those kinds of civic conversations. How do we talk about things that may have happened in New Mexico history that some people are not proud of, that some people would really rather not talk about? But maybe if we just lay it all out and we all kind of discuss it, then maybe we can find some kind of resolution and decide we're not going to do things that way anymore. We're going to move on forward to a more positive future. So I would say what I have learned really is that people want to talk about those very things. So when we start like excluding things from New Mexico history, excluding voices and perspectives, then it's boring and nobody wants to even talk about it. There's nothing to see here. I'm a proponent of really telling it like it is. I think we should really just have a very fact-based kind of model for presenting history and cultural issues, and then assume that it's just the beginning, that you are there to start that conversation in an inclusive way. So the greatest response that we have is when we are honest and inclusive.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever have the experience of visitors who come into the RV and have a conversation either between themselves or with you about contested histories in a place?
It has happened that people get into conversations with each other about what happened, say at Bosque Redondo, something they learned that they didn't know before, and they start talking about it. It's usually not oppositional. It's usually, oh, I didn't know that, and then someone of a different identity will say, yeah, that happened to people in my family, and then they have a conversation about it, and it's usually polite. You know, in face-to-face encounters, people are trying to be polite and get along with each other, and that should be the basis, really. That is laying a basis of kind of trust and cooperation in dealing with these kind of historical controversies.
The 2025 Wonders on Wheels mobile exhibition, 8 Sites, 1 History, is on tour through Christmas. Upcoming stops include Santa Fe, Homegrown in Las Cruces, Lights of Gisela at Jemez Historic Site, and Winter of Enchantment at Big Jim Farms in Albuquerque. For dates, details, and to request a stop in your area, visit the Wonders on Wheels website or Facebook group, both of which are linked for you in the show notes. Encounter Culture is a production of the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. Our producer is Andrea Klunder at the Creative Imposter Studios. This season is produced and edited by Andrea Klunder and Alex Riegler, with additional editing by Monica Brain. Our recording engineers are Colin Underleiter and Cabby at Cabby Sound Studios in Santa Fe. Technical direction and post-production audio by Edwin R. Ruiz. Our executive producer is Daniel Zillman. Thank you to New Mexico artist El Brujo de Santinava for our theme music. For a full transcript and show notes, visit podcast.nmculture.org or click the link in the episode description in your listening app. I'm your host, Emily Withnall. The New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs is your guide to the state's entire family of museums, historic sites, and cultural institutions. From native treasures to space exploration, world-class folk art to ancient dinosaurs, our favorite way to fully explore is with the New Mexico Culture Pass. To see everywhere Culture Pass is accepted and reserve yours today, visit nmculture.org/visit/culturepass. And if you love New Mexico, you'll love El Palacio magazine. Subscribe at elpalacio.org. Thank you for listening. And if you learned something new, send this episode to a friend or share it on social media. We love celebrating the cultures of New Mexico together.